Hello, everybody, and thank you for listening to Soul Talk. This is Jeremy McDonald, and we have a great show for us today on Saturday. And we have Patricia Walker, on the line, and we're going to be talking about her soul journey as well as her book, Dance of the Electric Hummingbird. And you can just feel the energy when you say that. And it's an ordinary woman's accidental journey to enlightenment, the supernatural, and this is great, a rock star, Sammy Hagar. And you know what's cool, Pat, welcome to the show. I was Google searching your name last night, and I found that Sammy Hagar was saying, read your book on some kind of online article. I was like, that is the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, he does it quite often. I'm very grateful, and I want to say thank you for having me on the show as well, Jeremy. Thank you.
You're most welcome. So let's back up for a little bit, because I've been reading through your material in your book and everything, and just feeling your energy. I like to spend the morning before I interview somebody just kind of feeling somebody's energy and meditation and that kind of stuff. And like I was telling you before we came on the show, I felt a person that has had a similar journey, maybe slightly different, that where you came from a really hard place and then you found something happened and you found happiness. And I know I've read this in your book, but can you talk a little bit about where you came from and where you're at now?
Well, I've always been a spiritual person, kind of always looking for more out of life, believing that there's got to be more than what we see with our eyes. And I was raised in the Catholic faith when I was a kid. I didn't quite understand some of the explanations there for some of the questions I had that never seemed to get answered, like, why is this the one true religion when other people probably say the same thing about theirs, and not knocking religion by any means here. Whatever works for you is wonderful, but I just started peering over the wall of Catholicism to see what else was out there, studying some Native American lore a little bit. I stumbled upon some books in the library when I was a kid on that, but I didn't have anybody I could really talk to about that kind of thing, and so it never went further than that. And then along came the Kung Fu TV show and the Billy Jack movies, and those really stirred my interest as well, but again, I had no one I could really talk to about it. So I've always had this spiritual search going on in my life, and was raised to be upstanding, moral Catholic girl, and went to Mass when I was a kid. The Mass was all in Latin back in those days, and it was really drilled into my head that God was someone that I was supposed to fear, and because of that, I think I married a man. Well, we were just pretty much kids at the time, in my early 20s, and he was my first sexual partner, so I felt like I was sinning in the eyes of God, and I should really atone my sins and marry this guy. I had no idea what I was doing in any instance here, and married this guy who proceeded to abuse me physically and sexually, and eventually would have killed me, I'm sure, if I would have stayed with him. We had a child together, and I think the impetus to leave my husband was the fact that he started to threaten to hurt our baby that we had together. So that was what gave me the courage to leave that severely abusive relationship. And I know now that if I hadn't, I wouldn't be here now telling my story. But I also know that that kind of thing happened to me to help me become more compassionate and empathetic to other people who are going through similar things, and maybe not even something as severe as that, certainly things as severe as that, but not only things as severe as that. Sometimes we just find ourselves, I think, in a rut in our lives, and we're not happy, but we can't figure out what we should do differently, or we think we're too old or too something to make changes. But I think all of this happened to me, and so that I could write this book and hopefully inspire people that if something so horrible could turn into something so magnificent for me, that I could serve as an example to others as well.
Yeah. Yeah. How many people are out there that are living in abusive or bad situations and they feel like they can't get out? Or,
right.
I think we taught, that our culture taught young women too that once they're married they can't leave and they have to obey their husband. And I don't necessarily, that wasn't correct. And they get stuck in these situations. Well, and young men were taught something similar. Maybe it's so that some of them get stuck in situations of abuse or reverse abuse. So
yeah.
So it gives hope to people that, I've seen people in abusive relationships that they say, I can't get anything better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, you can get so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you learn that
exactly.
God doesn't want you to be there, God doesn't want you to be in abusive situations, then you know that God's going to bring you the best once you say yes to yourself.
Right, and I think that was a huge thing for me, is being afraid to leave because I thought, well, maybe God is punishing me for my sins of, having sex out of wedlock and with this guy, but I married him, but maybe this is God's way of punishing me, and but I also thought that if I left him and I divorced him, that would be another sin against me, and that, so I really felt trapped as far as that went. But after I divorced him and left, I was honestly waiting for God to strike me down and punish me even worse for the sin of divorcing my husband, when, the opposite really sort of happened. It opened up a light in my life, and things started turning around for me. So, this cold I've got here.
It's okay. So, Sammy Hagar ended up becoming your spiritual, almost like a spiritual light, or a sounding board, or somebody that helped you through this. Am I understanding that correctly, or am I?
Right. He was initially, I think, a conduit to the mystical experience and the out-of-body experience that I had during his concert in 2003 that really, really changed my life. And he's been very encouraging of me ever since, going out of his way for me, encouraging me to tell my story. He gave me an endorsement for my book as well. And he's just really done a lot of things, recommended books for me to read, allowed me to use his name and his lyrics and photos of him in the book, and announced about my book at a lot of his concerts, and encouraging me to never give up on writing, because that's always been my dream, to be a writer, which was what made it kind of full circle for me, was starting out being such a seeker for what felt like truth to me, and having to go through these trials and tribulations, as we all do, and eventually finding God, and that's really how I kind of describe it, is I found God inside of me during this concert through that of Sammy's, and he's been just really wonderful to me ever since. When I told him what happened to me, it's been a great experience, like I said, all the way around. I think to come full circle to help me realize my dream to be a writer, and that's what I've accomplished because of this. So I really want to encourage other people as well to never give up on what's important to them and what their dreams are, because if I can do it, so can you.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think is really cool about your story is that I think you were in a store and a Sammy Hagar video jumps out to you. Am I correct? And then you thought it was a sign, and then you thought maybe you were reading too deeply into it, and then you wanted to write him, and it took you a while to do so.
Right.
And then you did, and that was the bridge, I think, that brought the two of you, brought the communication of the two of you together. And why I'm bringing that up is because the universe is so incredible how it brings people and events into our lives to get us to that right and perfect moment.
Yes.
And so you listened.
And there were so many. Yeah, and there were so many as well for me. Just the fact that I was in Cabo at his bar at that time, I wasn't even going to go. My husband and I had been down there several years earlier and both got Montezuma's revenge, so I had no desire to go back down there again. My husband said he won an auction or internet eBay auction, I guess, for a trip down to Cabo for a week. And I said, that's okay, go ahead and take a friend with you. I'm not going to go. I've been there, done that. I don't need to be sick again, so take someone else with you. And then he said, well, there's this big rock star who owns a bar down there, and every now and then he'll perform in his bar, and it says on his website when he's going to be performing, so why don't we go then? And I think, people need to know that I didn't know who Sammy Hagar was before any of this happened. I think some people find that hard to believe, but when he was real popular in the mid-'80s and through the mid-'90s, when he first started coming on the scene, Montrose, and with his solo albums and with Van Halen, I never even heard of him. I was a single mom trying to raise my son by myself, and I was, listening to Raffi's "There's a Spider on the Floor," not Van Halen. So I had no idea who Sammy was when I went down there, which was what made it even more interesting to me that something like this should have happened through him. It wasn't like I was a fan of his for 20 years or whatever, looking for a connection to a favorite artist. I had no idea who he was, so I at the time I thought, why would something so spectacular happen to me through someone I've never even heard of before? So that just, in the long run, added, I think, a little more credence to my experience, at least in my opinion. So I didn't try to do it.
I believe that because I don't own a television, and most people think I'm crazy because I actually don't own a television, and so I don't know who or what's on television or what shows are out there unless somebody tells me about it. And so there's a few stars that I've had a few circumstances where something has come up in a dream to me, and that person's name has come up in my dream.
Really?
And I'll be telling it to somebody, and I'll be like, well, that's so and so. Like Nancy Grace is one of them, and I didn't know who Nancy Grace was up until about 6 months ago, and I had a dream about her.
Wow.
And so I'm like, I still don't really know what she does, to be honest with you. But somebody says, well, she's on the show, and da-da-da-da-da, and I'm like, oh, okay. So that's very believable to me, because when your mind is not in that, I guess, paradigm, when it's, focused on being a mom, that makes total sense to me.
Right.
How cool is that? So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this whole experience that happened to me in the middle of Sammy's concert, like you were saying, you're getting people's names coming to you and that sort of thing. It opened up something inside of me that was kind of like a passageway, I think, to the power of my mind and spirit. And things started happening to me like what you described that had never happened to me before. So I just kept following it and questioning it. The biggest thing, I think, for me was that I was just so skeptical, because I've always been taught, keep your feet on the ground and, question things and don't believe everything you think. Not only that you see, but that you think as well. So I set out on a quest to research what could have been happening to me. And so, like you said, things just, psychic abilities and things like you described just started happening to me like crazy after this.
Yeah, it's been, it's incredible though, and I tell you what, when I first started having supernatural things happen to me, nobody believed me. But I find that the more and more you get into it, for one thing, your friends change. You might still have the old friends that you had from years ago, but they're there, but they're not there because they can't believe, they don't believe in the same things or see the same things or experience the same things that we do. And so then the new friends start coming in, and then they relate to you, and so then it's actually hard for me to be around others that don't see the same things I do. It's not that they're doing anything bad. I just I can't talk to them about anything because this is the subjects I talk about most of the time, and I think that really just starts changing our paradigm and how we see the world, because then we stop thinking we're crazy. That's
right.
And then we realize, no, this is very natural because we're around people that are experiencing the same phenomenons or experiences that we're experiencing. So I think that's an incredible journey. So
yeah, and I had never even heard of anything like this happening to anyone before. So I had nobody. Like you said, I had nobody I could talk to about it to try and understand what was going on. But then I started doing research at Googling out-of-body experiences and altered states of consciousness, and then I started reading about other people that had had similar experiences, and I even spoke with a psychologist because I was really worried that, like you said, like I was losing it. And he told me, no, the things you describe, a lot of other people talk about similar things. No, you're not crazy. You've just been blessed with something, a really special gift, and you should be grateful for that. But like you said, it is really tough because people that you're used to hanging around with, all of a sudden, you don't know how to shift that, letting go of some people. But you're right, new people come in, and that has been a very pivotal thing for me as well. New people have come into my life and led me further down my spiritual path, and it's just been absolutely incredible, the people I have met, not only Sammy, but lots of other famous musicians and wonderful people, authors and speakers and people that are so loving and giving that I wouldn't have met any of these people if it wouldn't have been for this experience.
Absolutely. And that's like this particular show. I had resisted doing it for the longest time, and people kept on saying, you should start an online radio show. I mean, since like 2006, people have been telling me this, and I was like, no, I'm going to be an author. And then I wanted to do YouTube for a while, and I started this show, and I've met the coolest, most awesome people.
See?
And then I was actually, what's that?
See what I mean? Same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I actually was going to cancel the show at one point. And then I just sat down in meditation, and I said to the universe, I said, if I'm supposed to do this, make it easy for me. And then Sarah came into my life. Sarah just found me on Facebook. And I was like, if that is not a gift, I don't know what is. And so I think what really your book is a lot about is follow your passion and stick with it, and perseverance. And even though it doesn't look like on the surface that anything's happening, maybe, but it really is. It's the universe is building a momentum. At least that's what I'm feeling from you. And then because you, in the beginning of your book, you talk a lot about unworthiness, and in where you just really didn't feel very good about yourself, and now that's all changed. And so, but you had to climb out of there. And how hard was that? I mean, obviously, I've read the book, but for the listeners, how hard was that for you to change that thought process?
Very, very difficult, because I was raised, as I said, strict Catholic, and I was taught to fear the Lord, and that my interpretation was that I could never aspire to be good enough to please God, but I had to spend my whole life trying anyway. I was a sinner from birth, and I was never going to amount to anything, and I'm saying this was my interpretation of it. So I spent most of my life trying to just please not only God, but I think everybody, and that's not always a good thing because you can't please everybody. You can only really please yourself, and until you realize that, I use the analogy in my book of when you're on the airplane and they talk to you before the flight takes off about putting on your own oxygen mask before putting on someone else's. I think that's really, really true in this case, is if you don't love yourself and take care of yourself and nurture yourself first, you can't give that to someone else until you've done that for yourself. So it was very, very hard for me, and as I mentioned before about being skeptical of the things that were happening to me, almost ridiculously skeptical over and over, and things kept happening, and I just kept poo-pooing them all the time, thinking, it's just my imagination, or it's something that just a coincidence. But it wasn't until very recently that I've realized that I am a good person and I can accomplish anything I set my mind to, and I'm having these intuitive things coming to me, and I've learned to finally trust them, because when I do, they always lead me to the place I need to be, as you mentioned before, that things just fall into place, even though they don't look on the surface like maybe things are happening, but they do. We don't always see what's happening beneath it, and it might seem like it's something really insignificant, but by trusting your intuition and following with it, even though you don't really see the end result, that's when amazing things happen. And you've read probably so many books by people that say the same thing in different words, the power of intention and infinite possibilities and all sorts of things. And everybody's really saying the same thing, is, maybe focus on the goal, but don't worry about the means to get there, because when you start going in that direction, the universe and God is going to come in and lift you up and take you there anyway. You don't have to try to get it; will take you there.
Absolutely, it's that. So, and you're right. There's so many books that say the same things.
Yeah.
Just different words, different stories.
Right.
But it's like a lot of these new things are coming out with what's called the New Age movement, and I always say this is not New Age, this is very old age.
Right.
It's the same thing over and over again. And my interpretation of what my church was saying was similar, but my church, I should believe that it was exactly what you were talking about, that they were the one and only true church, and the only God, they were the only God's chosen people, and the same story. And that we were trying to get ourselves. They didn't believe in a heaven. We were trying to get ourselves into a place of safety.
Mm-hmm.
And for the coming of the end. And I just thought, this is a really scary world.
Yeah.
And so finally I was like, I can't do this. And my mother was actually the saving grace, because she questioned it and pulled out when I was very young and gave me the choice to stay in if I wanted. I was like 13 or 14. And I left like 6 months later. And then my mother was very intuitive and started having experiences. So she actually got and started actually following Spirit in this direction more before I did. I thought she was crazy, to be honest with you. And,
see, there you go again.
and I was judging her. So,
we all do it.
And then we went on, and I started listening to what she was saying, and we grew from it. We both grew from it. And so I had that experience. I had my mother to talk to about it quite a bit. But It's so interesting how the world, a good majority of people are so inundated by that idea. you know what's really interesting, Pat, is that it's not just Christians. I find it in every religion. I find that in every religion somebody interprets that they have to suffer or they have to be a victim. In Buddhism and paganism and different religions, I'm like, it's so interesting that that's a common theme. But when you read their text, it actually doesn't say that. It says that we have to walk through hell or a dark night of the soul before we can find liberation. It doesn't say we suffer and hope for God's grace.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that the interpretation is something totally different.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. It's somebody's interpretation of it. And I think I was taught, or I should say my interpretation of what I was taught as a child was that I was not worthy enough to interpret the holy words of the Bible for myself. I had to rely on someone else's interpretation. And I can certainly understand that in the beginning, of course. You know, it's the same with a child. You're not going to sit there and explain to a 2-year-old why he can't run out in the street when there's a car coming. You just say, don't go in the street. But as you grow, you should be able to interpret things for yourself and see what feels right to you. And I honestly believe that all religions and all beliefs are based on the same truth anyway. They're just, because truth is truth in any language or any religion. And that was what I saw when I had my out-of-body experience during the concert that time, was that everything is connected to everything else. And God was not a gender or a race or a religion, but a combination of all of these things and none of these things all at the same time, and that we are all connected to each other and to God and to everything in this world, plants, animals, rocks, stars, in this world and other worlds that are out there that we can't even comprehend. There are so many out there, but it's all connected. So when we hurt someone else, we're really hurting ourselves as well, because we're all connected and we're all affected. There's that ripple effect that happens. So I think that was a really big thing for me, and a very hopeful thing for me to see that there was no judgment. And I was always taught, if you mess up, you know, God's going to send you to hell and He's going to judge you. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that would disagree with me, but now I've seen that God is not judgmental, that God is all loving, and God is in me and I am in God, and it's all one thing. So there doesn't need to be that fear. There's so much fear and negativity in the world nowadays, and I don't know where all of that comes from, but I'm just hoping that my story will lighten people's lives a little bit and give them hope and realize that they don't have to live in that fear, because it's so stifling, and it's just, you can't grow if you're living in fear. You have to let down the boundaries so that you can let the good stuff come to you.
You know, it's interesting you should talk about that, about fears, because when I went and had my, I guess we call it an awakening or whatever, when I, you know, felt just that breaking of the fear consciousness in me, or the transmutation of it, I went back and I started reading the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it read vastly different than when I was a kid. Because the metaphors, I realized that they were all metaphors and symbols.
Right.
So that's why they call it the Living Bible. And if you're not living inside, you're going to see it as fear. Right. You're going to see it word for word, and you're going to see it as judgmental. And I'm like, that is so interesting. Like when I read the story about, when I read 1 Corinthians 12, when he says that the whole body of God has to exist in oneness, basically is what it's saying, and that the toe cannot look up at the heart or the head and say, I don't need you.
Right.
You know, then
I
the
love
body
that.
would not function. And so I'm like, wait a second, they're talking about oneness right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the story of the prodigal son, where the prodigal son comes back. God's not, the Father's not judging him. He's saying, welcome.
Exactly.
He's like, I love you. I've never stopped loving you, and you are welcome here anytime. And so that's, and then so what you're talking about is just waking up and realizing that what not everybody is realizing in this world, that we've got so many crazy things going on, and everybody is just in that story of fear. And I'm like, and I just every day my prayers are just to wake them up, in love and compassion.
Right.
And I feel compassion because I've been there. So.
Right.
Interesting experiences.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Definitely.
So
well, you're right.
What's going on for you next?
Next? Well, actually, I'm having surgery on my foot coming up in a couple weeks, so I'm going to be kind of laying low for a little bit. But in the meantime, I'm studying to become certified facilitator for the Monroe Institute. I went there, took their Gateway program, and I was so impressed with that I wanted to study it further. The reason I even went there in the first place is, again, following this path, I was fascinated by the fact that sound played such a major role in my transformation and my out-of-body experience. And when I heard about the Monroe Institute and how they use sound to help induce altered states of consciousness and out-of-body experiences, I just had to find out more about it. So I went to the 6-day program and had to know more. So I'm going to be studying to do that. And I've become certified to teach infinite possibilities classes as well. So I'm hoping to put all these things together to start teaching people and giving them tools to take the things that I talk about in my book, as you and I discussed before, instead of just telling people this is what you need to do. I wanted to share my story of how it happened for me, but I'd also like to not just stand up in front of people and talk at them. I want to be able to give them tools to maybe tap into this part of themselves, because we all have the ability inside of us, but we've just become so, again, fearful or closed down for whatever reason, and a little apprehensive about, even though we might want it, a little apprehensive about making changes for things like that. So I want to be able to give people tools that they can take with them, taking the concepts of my book and making it personal for them. So I'm going to be working on those things, and I'm composing a story for a collaborative book project called Tears to Triumph, and I'm also working on my next book. I'm working on a video interview, and I'm putting video interviews, working to put some of those on my website as well, exploring different aspects of spirituality, and just to give people a little bit more, as much as I can. So that's what I have coming up in the immediate future, and hopefully once my foot gets healed up, I'll be out there teaching these workshops for people and hopefully helping people as much as I can, because I believe that's the whole reason I was called to write this book, to be able to spread that for others.
So you're basically building up your toolkit to help other people have tools.
Yes.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So what is, along those lines, what are some tools that can people, obviously your out-of-body experience was you were led into that experience, but what are some things that you could give listeners that maybe would help them meditate or get into that space where they could start listening to spirit? I know what I would tell them, but through your experience, what would you tell the listeners?
Well, I think that the way to do a couple of things that I like to tell people is to get out in nature for one thing, and just observe and let the sounds, the smells, the way it feels on your skin. Is it hot or cold? Can you feel the sun or the breeze blowing on your skin? Just notice those things. Another thing is to lose yourself in a hobby. Whatever hobby you enjoy is a great meditative thing as well. If you're so engrossed in baking cookies or tinkering on your car engine or something, you forget all about the self and just lose. That's a meditative thing as well. You just kind of lose the world, outside world, and are looking completely absorbed in what you're doing. And in Zen they called that beginner's mind, and I think that's a really great thing. I also tell people to pay attention to their dreams. Dreams are really important, and write them down, because sometimes things will be revealed later on down the road that you never realized at the time. You might think, wow, this is a silly symbol that came to me in my dream. I had a really interesting, actually it wasn't even a dream. I was at my kitchen sink and I looked out the window and the clouds, this still kind of boggles my mind. The clouds were making this symbol that I'd never seen before, and I knew if by the time I ran and got my camera or my phone, it would be gone. So I just drew it real quick on a piece of paper, and I contacted my friend who's Jewish because it looked like a Jewish symbol, and sure enough, she told me that it was a symbol in Hebrew, and it was just amazing. So things like that come to us in dreams as well, and maybe we don't understand it right away, but we might later. So that's another important thing. And I think that as well is watch for signs around you, because I never would have thought anything of it. At first I thought it was like a vapor trail from an airplane passing overhead, but it was really distinct, and it was kind of jagged, so it couldn't have been that. And another thing I tell people is to look for joy, find the things that bring you joy, and do them as often as you can. It doesn't have to be something that costs money. If being with your family brings you joy, make an effort to do that more often, because we are meant to experience joy. That's what our lives are for. So go out there and find it and do it. And meditate, as you said, meditation is a really great tool as well. Opens the mind and relaxes us. And to me, whenever I have a problem that I'm struggling with, even with writing, how do I say this? I notice that if I sit down and even just 10 minutes and just meditate, things come to me a lot more easily, and I tend not to get so stressed and worried about things if I meditate every day. I think also when I'm in the shower, sometimes answers will come to me, things I'll be thinking of, and I'll be taking a shower, and all of a sudden, oh, I know how to take care of that now. So I think all of that is just ways to be open, and opening your heart and your mind, and realizing that you have a choice in every single moment. You have a choice to make this a positive experience or a negative experience. I just read a quote this morning, something to that effect, where it's not the experience itself or the people around you that make the situation good or bad. It's what you think about it and how you deal with it. So those are the kind of the things that I like to tell people.
That's not what it's interesting. You just talk about doing things that make you happy, or like tinkering on a car, or
right.
Taking for a walk in nature. You know, I have 2 large dogs, and one of my biggest joys is just to take them for the walk. I mean, it's such a mundane thing in some ways because, they have to go to the bathroom and they have to do all that stuff. But I just like watching my Rottweiler when he's sniffing the tree and he wants to drag me to that tree because he so desperately has to get that smell. He's just so in the now of the moment that he's not thinking about Daddy's on the other side of that leash. But it makes me, I laugh and I have great joy. And I've found that even if I have, I'm a contract trainer as a profession, when I need to pick up money. And some people get really bent out of shape about having to work. And I'm like, you can turn anything into fun. Everything is spiritual. I said, there is nothing on this planet that you cannot make spiritual. So one day I may not be a contract corporate trainer. I may be a successful author, and I may be going around speaking, and I'm a successful author as it is. And so, we all have our preconceived notions about the way things are take us out of that space of joy and bliss. Yeah. And so, in every situation, we're always the teacher and the student.
You bet.
So, and some people say, well, that you're not working in God's world. And I'm like, oh, yes, because I work for the greatest CEO in the galaxy. And he and she is deep within me.
Yeah.
And so you can turn anything into fun. And I've learned, I have this phrase, one day it hit me. I was like, life is like Disney World when you're 7 years old. I don't know if you ever, have you ever seen a 7-year-old kid walk in and see Mickey Mouse and they see that castle and there's such joy on their face. And if you look at life that way, life is going to be incredible.
And I do. Yeah. And I think sometimes maybe that comes across as, being immature or childish or something, but that's how I look at life. I am childlike in that way because I think I've always been that way, and like you said with your dogs, it's the same thing with children. I have 4 grandchildren, and I can just go over to their house and sit down on the floor and play with my grandkids, and it's the same thing. I lose myself in just noticing their perfect little eyelashes or noticing how they react to things and pick up things and tell me things and do things. I totally forget that I have bills to pay or I have aches and pains or whatever. I'm just so in that moment with those kids that it's such a joy for me. Family is a really big thing for me. And like you said, animals as well. If you just spend time with your animals, they're that same purity and innocence, and that's I think what's really at the core of all of it. Not being judgmental and cruel to other people, but allowing others just to be who they are and yourself as well. And that's for me that was a very big thing, is judging myself, and this whole experience showed me all aspects of myself, the ones I deem pretty good and the ones that I deem maybe need a little bit of work, but to accept those and see them for what they are, and then to love all aspects of yourself. That's a difficult thing to do, but it's well worth your time to explore that, because we can't be whole until we do that sort of thing. So getting out of ourselves and looking at it from a distance and trying not to be judgmental of ourselves is a great tool as well. Not easily done always, I must admit, but well worth it.
You and me both. I started looking at myself in the eye, looking in the mirror eye to eye, and I'd start saying, I love you.
Yeah.
I love you. And my eyelids would twitch, and my whole eye would look away. You could see the whole eyeball turn away every time I'd say I love you. It couldn't accept that love. And so I would every morning do that. And then I even started standing in front of the mirror naked. And I would start saying all the parts of my body that I didn't like.
Yep.
I would start apologizing. And I would say, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. And then I would touch that area and just, like you would touch a child and say, you touch their face and say, I'm so sorry.
Right.
And you just start loving it. And that inner child inside started letting go.
Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible what we do to ourselves. And now when I know you see this too, now when we're on, further into this work, I see so many people. I met a friend that I hadn't seen in 10, 11 years. And I was at her wedding. I was at her first baby shower. And she had this wonderful marriage, and just something happened, and now they just had their divorce a week ago.
Aww.
And she believes in her mind that she's not good enough.
Yep.
And I was like, honey, there is nothing about you that's not good enough. Everything about you is perfect.
Aww.
And so, but she's got space of not believing.
Mhm.
And so that's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
There's a journey from there. And so it's really interesting to watch the human psyche go to that realm. I don't know if it's because we were programmed. I don't really know where it came from. I just know that it's there. So,
right.
And some of those tools that you're talking about, walking in nature, it gets us calming ourselves, getting caught up in spirit. It really helps us change and have a relationship with ourselves.
Right, and they seem like really insignificant things, but they're really not. There's so much truth in simplicity that's where we need to go. It's just there's a lot of people that have lots of techniques of, if you do this and this and this, then this will happen, but it doesn't always happen for everybody. So everybody has to find their own path, which is why I try to tell people that these things that I just mentioned, because what might mean something to me may not mean something to someone else. And I always use the analogy of carrots. They tell us carrots are good for you if you eat carrots, but what if you're allergic to them and you can't eat them? So we need to try things on and see what works for us in different ways, and everybody has something different.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because we're all different, and that's amazing, that we all have different perspectives, different way of looking at things, and I think that's a blessing, because you have a different perspective. Even from I was born in Minneapolis, and then lived in the Midwest for a good part of my childhood. But my home, to me, even though I was born in Minneapolis, is Tampa, Florida. Mm-hmm. So because of that, just being in those three different parts of the country makes me even different from you, because you were raised probably in a different area, and
right.
The culture is different, and the way we see things differently. The weather is different, maybe. I think that those circumstances change our perspective too, and I think that.
You bet. And it also makes us better people, I think, if we are willing to step outside of our known little world and explore different cultures and different foods and different places. I think that makes us a more well-rounded person if we can see other people's perspectives a little bit. We can't exactly see their perspective, but if we step into their world, like you said, going from Minneapolis to Tampa is a whole different climate, and people probably have a little bit different accents and different type of food they like to eat, and because you've seen both of those, that gives you a broader perspective than if you hadn't ever left Minneapolis.
Right.
So,
well,
yeah.
It's funny because last year we were driving through, we came down through, I think not Salt Lake City, Idaho City, in Idaho, I can't remember, Idaho Falls, that's what it was. We came down through Coeur d'Alene, back through Montana, through Idaho Falls, and then went down in through, I think it's Elko, Nevada, and then went on through Nevada. And the interesting part about that is the energy to me is different. It's not bad, it's just different out west as it is in the East Coast. And so the funniest thing I saw is that Nevada is broken up into desert, 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 desert. Then there's the road we took. There's like this oasis lake with trees around it. And then there's this small town where we stopped and had lunch, and then it was desert, all the way to Vegas. And then Vegas is the city in the middle of the desert, and the mountains around it. And it's beautiful. I've been to Vegas a couple times for vacation, and then we didn't even know we stopped right next to Hoover Dam because we were so tired. And we drove out of there, and we drove across Hoover Dam. And later on, I was like, somebody said, "Did you see Hoover Dam?" I was like, "No, I didn't see it." And they were laughing, and you drove right over the top of it.
Wow.
But what was so phenomenal to me is that when you're in those smaller towns, the way people look at things is so much different than, because I was born to a family that was farmers, but I've been living in cities all my life. So that's vastly different because the culture in the city is to move. Mm-hmm. So it's, I enjoy the times when I get out to a lake and I'm in a cabin in the mountains somewhere.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting that, how people do things. But, we've given a lot of pointers here, and we've talked about your story, and we've talked about everything going on. When is your next book? Do you have an idea when your next book is coming out, or are you just in the middle of writing it? Or?
Well, I have, I'm in the middle of writing it. I have 6 chapters written, so we'll see. It just depends on how quickly things flow and how much time I have to work on it. Looks like I'm going to have some time here after this foot surgery, so I'm hoping to make a lot of headway on it for that. And I'm still deciding whether it's going to be fiction or nonfiction, but I was leaning more towards fiction, but I don't know yet. So it's probably going to be a little of each. So if it's a little of each, then it has to be called fiction.
Yeah, I understand that. My next book is going to be it's going to be about my journey across the country. But after that, I think I'm going to start writing. After that, I think I'm going to start writing fantasy.
Yeah, because you can really use your imagination then, huh?
Well, and what I've done is I've actually taken all my friends in my life. I mean, I've been very blessed with wonderful, wonderful friends in the past few years. And for a guy that thought he was always alone in a room full of people, now I have friends that I feel so connected with, but I'm connected with myself, and that's different. So I've literally created a story in my mind. My friend Justin is an elf king with red hair and blue eyes.
Oh, wow.
and I've told them all what their characters are going to be like. And I'm like, I'm definitely writing a fantasy book. This would be cool.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw this out there for everybody that's listening. Patricia Walker is our guest, and her website is www.bajarockpat.net. So it's BAJAROCKPAT.net. And I'm assuming that's where they would get your book.
They can get signed copies. Yeah, they can get signed copies from my website, but you can also get it on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, or you can ask for it at your favorite bookstore as well. Available in ebook format for Kindle or Nook as well. And Sammy was selling it at the Cabo Wabo gift shop down in Mexico, but they ran out a couple days ago, so I don't know if they'll be getting more in there. Hopefully they'll be getting some more in the gift shop there. That was very kind of him to offer my book for sale there as well. So
that's awesome. Very supportive he is. That's incredible.
Yeah, I had no idea he was such a spiritual person at the time.
I had a similar experience, and I just want to throw this out there before we kind of start to wrap up the show. After my mother passed away, I met a man that I had no idea who he was, and somebody came to her memorial and said, "You have to go to Raymond Moody's conference next month when he's here." So I went, and I, as a result of this show, got really courageous in my life and just started asking people to be on my show, and I didn't care who they were, how famous they were, or anything like that. I just wanted them on my show. So I walked up to him and I asked him to be on my show. And as he signs my book, he says absolutely and writes his email address in it. And he was on my show. And there's an incredible journey that comes with that, because I found you mentioned here in the book that you got starstruck.
Yeah.
I didn't get starstruck with Raymond Moody. I got starstruck with another doctor that came onto my show, and I was so nervous. I spent 2 hours in meditation trying to calm myself down. And then he has an Indian name. I messed up his name 3 times on the show. And I'm sure I don't know if you've heard of Amit Goswami, but that was him.
Oh, yeah.
He's been on my show. He's been on my show twice, and he's so giving and so caring. He didn't even say anything about it. He didn't even bring it up. And so it was because in 2003 I had my huge awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And his first movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, came out a year after that.
Yeah.
And I was like, he was my beginning. So here I am 10 years later, almost 10 years later, interviewing him, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm finally get to meet him. I'm finally get to talk to him. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I'd had a show for 3 years, and here I'm in it.
Wow. It's funny how we do that. I don't get that way anymore with Sammy, but it's funny how we get that way. But really, they're just people like we are, so I don't know where that comes from. But What the Bleep Do We Know? That was a great movie, and I just wanted to add that you said your awakening happened in 2003, and mine did as well, so we'll have to talk more.
Absolutely. I'm sure we will, and I'm sure you'll be on the show again. So
I hope so.
We'll definitely talk.
Great.
So, I thank you for being on the show, and everybody, thank you for listening, and we will have another show next week. And so I will talk to you soon, Miss Pat Walker, and I appreciate it.
Yes, I do too, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.